Forensic science begins at the end of someone else's story. Scrutinizing a violent moment in time. Samples are collected and preserved. The scene exhaustively photographed. Evidence prepared for forensic experts to examine. Television and movies fuel blind faith in the power of crime scene investigations, or CSI. But since the emergence of DNA analysis, a disturbing trend has emerged. DNA, pulled from evidence that spent decades gathering dust, has revealed a surprising number of wrongful convictions. In fact, in hundreds of exoneration cases, DNA did more than free the innocent. It proved that the forensic evidence that convicted them was wrong. It's time to put CSI on trial, to find out what's real science, what has scientific potential, and what's just junk. The stakes couldn't be higher.
My name's David Lee Gavitt. I was charged of 1 count arson, 3 counts first-degree murder, 3 counts first-degree felony murder. I spent almost 27 years as an innocent man incarcerated because of the bad science that was used against me.
In 1985, David Gavitt, his wife Angela, and their 2 young daughters, 11-month-old Tracy and 3-year-old Katrina, were living at his mother's home in Ionia, Michigan.
We were living at my mother's house. Angela and I just bought a piece of land, and we were planning on building a house. Angela was a sweetheart. We met in the 8th grade. Went steady, got engaged in high school. She was the love of my life.
On the night of March 9th, the couple watched television in the living room. Before going to sleep, they checked in on the girls. Their rooms were directly across from each other. They left the door ajar in case one of them needed something.
All I can remember is that when Angela and I was in the bedroom, I'm laying there just half asleep and half awake, and I hear the dog scratching at the bedroom door. I'm thinking, okay, well, I'll let the dog outside. I opened the bedroom door, and the first thing I noticed was smoke in the hallway. And I go, oh my God, Angela, the house is on fire. I'll make an escape route, try to get the kids out of the bedroom. She went into the children's bedroom to get the kids. I broke out the bedroom window because the fire was in the living room, and here we are all the way down at the end of the hall, so we were a good distance away from the fire at the time. We got separated, and I'm crawling on the floor trying to get back to the children's bedroom where Angela was, because Angela should have been out of there by now.
But the flames were too intense. David had to escape.
All I could think of at the time was, oh my God, maybe she made it out. That's when I made my escape out of the bedroom window that I broke. Went around to the back of the house, to the children's bedroom, and noticed, no, they weren't outside.
Desperate to find Angela and the girls, David tried to enter the house through the back door, but a neighbor pulled him back. In just a few minutes, the fire swept away David Gavitt's entire world.
remember then crying out for Angela and the kids, and they weren't around. There was no one around here.
Paramedics took Gavitt to the hospital, where he anxiously waited for news about his family. He hoped they had somehow escaped.
I asked the doctors, "Where's Angela? Where's Katrina and Tracy?" And they said, they didn't say anything at first, and I go, "I want to know where they're at. Where are they at?" They said, "Mr. Gavitt, they didn't make it out of the fire." And that's when I broke down and I said, no, let me go. Let me die with them.
But that was only the beginning of his nightmare. While David recovered, fire investigators were called to the scene to determine how the fire started. They sifted through the burnt remains of the house and found shiny, charred wood, glass with spider-like cracks, and unusual burn patterns on the floor. Telltale signs, they believed, that the fire was intentionally set. Imran Syed is a lawyer who worked on Gavitt's case.
A investigator from the state fire marshal's office walked through the fire scene and believed he found what he believed to be unmistakable signs of arson, that the fire burned too quickly to have been a natural fire, that the burning into the floors was too intense and too deep to have happened in a fire that didn't involve accelerant.
Accelerants, like gasoline or some other flammable liquid. The police only had one suspect in mind.
Basically, they thought I set the fire because I survived. Roughly around 3 months after the fire, they charged me.
Gavitt was arrested and charged with arson and the murder of his family. He had no previous convictions. Character witnesses said he had good relationships with his wife Angela and their children. And several of his neighbors saw him desperately trying to save his family. But the prosecution was determined to prove his guilt, based on the testimony of 3 fire investigators. They took multiple samples before finding what they said tested out to be gasoline.
What they had was kind of the cherry on top, was a chemist who testifies that he did chemical testing on some carpet samples and found highly evaporated gasoline to be present in the carpet samples.
They said it was poured in the living room and stopped just short of the children's bedroom. And they just kept saying, it's a low burning fire. We can tell by the burn patterns of the floor.
The prosecution argues the fire burned low and not high, as fire is supposed to. This means it started on the floor as a result of a flammable accelerant, leaving a pattern behind. The lab technician's interpretation? Gasoline. Compelling testimony that David had intentionally killed his family. The jury is convinced.
The verdict was read guilty on 3 counts first-degree murder, 3 counts first-degree felony murder, 1 count arson.
And Gavitt is sentenced to life with no possibility of parole.
I was innocent. I knew I was innocent.
In 1986, David began his life sentence. He too believed the experts that the fire was arson. But he never stopped claiming his innocence. Time may have stopped for Gavitt, but the field of fire science was about to undergo a drastic evolution. one that would change many of the basic assumptions that put him behind bars. Investigating a fire scene presents unique challenges.
The problem is, oftentimes with fire investigations, unlike many other criminal investigations, not only do you have your scene disturbed, but you've had a whole crew full of people with thousands of gallons of water moving everything around, rushing through to rescue people. And what you end up seeing when you show up is nowhere near what it was like when it started.
To understand how fires function in the real world, scientists began to set and study them in controlled environments, and to collect data at the sites of real-life fires. In 1991, a leading fire scientist, John Lentini, led a research team to examine the remains of a naturally occurring fire in Oakland, California. What began as a grass fire burned out of control for 3 days. In the end, it took 3,000 houses and the lives of 25 people.
What an opportunity to go and look at totally burned fires, to see what the baseline is, what it should be. Because we knew these were accidental fires.
And what they found completely upended conventional wisdom about fire.
The fire patterns like melted steel, melted copper, crazed glass, spalled concrete. We went looking for that out in Oakland, and we found it just about everywhere. We could have made an arson out of all those houses.
The culprit wasn't an arsonist. But where there was once wood, they found shiny, charred surfaces, patterned like alligator skin. Concrete structures had crumbled, and window glass was cracked into spiderweb patterns. All of the supposed telltale signs of arson.
So we just debunked like 3 or 4 myths all at once in 1991.
Later that year, Lentini investigated a Jacksonville, Florida house fire. 4 children and 2 adults perished in what would become known as the Lime Street Fire. Husband and father Gerald Lewis, who escaped the fire with his 3-year-old son, was charged with arson, manslaughter, and 6 counts of first-degree murder. He was accused of setting the house on fire with gasoline from his lawnmower. Like in David Gavitt's case, there was something that looked like a pour pattern on the floor. The prosecutor claimed it was made by gasoline Lewis used to start the fire.
There was a sharp, continuous, irregular pattern right through the living room doorway out to the hallway.
The prosecutor called on John Lentini to provide a report on the chemistry. Lentini was familiar with the fire investigator on the Lewis case.
I had seen his work on previous occasions and found it to be uniformly bad.
So he sent samples from the Lime Street fire to 10 different chemists.
They said, "John, you know this is not gasoline." And I said, "I know, I just wanted to make sure that I wasn't missing something."
If there was no gasoline, then why did the fire burn so fast and so hot? There had to be another explanation. Lentini arranged to recreate the fire under controlled circumstances.
What we have here is a house of the same vintage, apparently built by the same builder, and with almost all of the same construction details. It's about as identical as you could hope for.
The house was fitted out with similar furniture, cameras, and temperature monitors.
And we lit that thing on fire. We thought it was going to take 15 to 20 minutes to flash over the room. And by 4 minutes, the room had flashed over. And we were shocked.
Flashover is when the temperature in a room hits 1,200 degrees Fahrenheit. It's so hot, the entire room explodes into flames.
The room becomes, instead of being the source of the fire, it becomes on fire. It becomes the fire. And as a result, you get all sorts of crazy patterns that people used to think were signs of arson.
Both the speed and the heat of the fire were totally unexpected.
If you think about in the 50s and 60s, what furniture was made of and how homes were built. The furniture was made out of cotton and wood and wool. And if you light a couch on fire made out of those materials, it might take 30 minutes before that couch is fully involved.
By the 1970s, furniture manufacturers started using very different materials. They went from horsehair, cotton, and wood to mostly polyurethane.
If you light a couch on fire, you can bring the room to flashover in under 5 minutes, repeatedly. If your couch ever catches on fire, get out. Just get out.
The furniture in the Lime Street experiment revealed another bombshell.
And sure enough, there was a pour pattern.
A pour pattern, indicating an accelerant that Lentini knew was never poured.
Those materials melt and drip and burn and can form something that looks like a pour pattern on the floor, even though there was no additional accelerant or flammable liquid involved.
Synthetic furniture melted by flashover leaves behind what looks like a pour pattern. Those very same patterns investigators kept seeing in arson cases like David Gavitt's. Lentini took the findings of his test fire to the prosecutor in the Gerald Lewis case. Within a week, the prosecution dropped the case. Everything fire investigators held to be true about fire behavior was turning out to be false.
Lentini describes this as his come-to-Jesus moment, saying, holy crow, an accidental fire produced all of the same symptoms of real fire.
But Lentini faced backlash from the Lime Street fire's investigators.
They were really upset. Oh man, how could you do that? Why didn't you just let it go to trial and let the jury decide? You know, and that's not how science works.
Science journalist and author Doug Starr writes about the history of forensic science.
There's been a real revolution in the understanding of how fire starts, how it behaves, and we need to bring this into the courts.
Disrupting the status quo, even for new science, would prove challenging.
Most of the people performing fire investigations were either police officers or firemen. And they weren't trained scientists. In fact, they didn't like science.
And their working knowledge was passed down from a trusted source.
Arson was always one of these apprenticeship kind of skills, and that you were trained by your superiors, usually an older guy, about, well, this is what arson looks like. Here's the V mark indicating where this fire started, or here's the deepest charring, or here's what a pour pattern is. And it was all intuitive.
It's just the Wild West, and someone can say, look, based on my experience, this is the answer. That's not really science if it's something that's just based on your experience. Science is something that should lead to the same outcome regardless of who the scientist is.
In 1992, based on the findings of Lentini and other scientists, the National Fire Protection Association published its first science-based arson investigation handbook with the catchy name NFPA 921. It struck a nerve.
A lot of fire investigators just hated that document. They said, how dare these people tell me how to do my job?
It's always tough to make change. When you embrace a report saying your science was wrong, you've got this backlog of cases that you did the wrong way.
Yo, you know that guy you sent to prison 10 years ago based on low burns and shiny alligators and crazed glass? None of that's true. And that is an unspeakable error.
An unspeakable error at an unspeakable human cost, as was the case for one Texas man. Cameron Todd Willingham was the father of 1-year-old twins, Cameron and Carmen, and 2-year-old Amber. On the night of December 23, 1991, in Corsicana, Texas, a fire broke out in the Willingham's small one-story house.
Willingham says that he woke up to smoke in the house. He was unable to get to the kid's bedroom and went out the front door in his bare feet.
His neighbor found Willingham on the front porch, crying out for his children. It would take only minutes for the fire to consume the house. His 3 daughters didn't make it out alive. After the blaze, fire investigators combed through Willingham's home, finding that the fire had burned low, charring the floor and leaving a puddle-like pattern. Sound familiar? Outside near a barbecue grill, they found a small bottle of lighter fluid and claimed Willingham had used it to start the fire. At the trial, the chief investigator pointed to the pour patterns and testified the fire doesn't lie.
They put a lot of really bad science before the jury in the Willingham case.
Once bad science gets in, it's still overwhelmingly convincing to the jury.
The jury found Willingham guilty and sentenced him to death for the murder of his children. He spent 18 years on death row before his execution was scheduled in 2004. As the date approached, his lawyers reached out to a renowned fire scientist named Gerald Hurst, who debunked each piece of evidence used to convict Willingham. Even the lighter fluid was ruled out as a viable fire starter.
So this deep charring that the fire marshal saw, it was the result of radiant heat from above when the house flashed over. It has since been proved that it is impossible for a flammable liquid to do that. It can't do it because it doesn't last long enough. You light it on fire, it burns, it goes away.
Once again, the most likely culprit was flashover, not an accelerant. Willingham's lawyers asked Texas Governor Rick Perry to grant a temporary stay of execution.
This is a monster who killed his children.
But the question is, was the science behind the conviction sufficient at the time? That seems to me to be the question.
I'm very comfortable that the science was good and that the justice dispense was good.
Despite the new science, Perry refused to grant the stay. On February 17, 2004, 36-year-old Willingham was strapped to the table in the Texas State Penitentiary in Huntsville and injected 3 times with a lethal substance. His last words were, "I am an innocent man convicted of a crime I did not commit." David Gavitt understands what it's like not to be believed.
It's sad. It's sad for them. It's sad for the Willingham family. My heart goes out to them.
Five years later, the National Academy of Sciences published a report formalizing what scientists like John Lentini had discovered: that long-accepted indicators of arson are not indicators at all. But there were no corresponding efforts to review arson convictions, like David Gavitt's case. Imprisoned for 27 years, at times he felt there was nothing to live for.
There were many times I felt like taking my life in there because my life pretty much was over with. I lost my daughters, I lost my wife that I loved deeply. I'm in prison for a crime I did not commit.
His cellmate, who became a paralegal inside prison, read through his case files.
He says, "You didn't do this, David. I can tell by reading transcripts. None of this makes any sense. None of it."
He encouraged David to reach out to the Michigan Innocence Project. Imran Syed was a third-year law student when he took on David's case in 2009.
We had seen that all of the evidence against him was this forensic fire science, which has been entirely discredited in the decades that followed. There was no other reason to believe David had done this.
To hear something like that someone's finally interested in my case, and I can't put into words. The feelings, the goosebumps that went over my body, it was like Angela hugging me and holding me, telling me it's gonna be okay. You better not ever give up.
But getting a retrial is nearly impossible, even in cases where scientific advancements shed new light.
You're not supposed to have innocent people in prison. If someone is tried and convicted by a jury, then they must be guilty because convicting someone is so difficult. We know that that's just not true, that juries will convict based on very, very flimsy evidence.
The team at the University of Michigan Law School Innocence Clinic brought in new experts to examine the prosecution's case.
From the beginning, the state's experts were abiding by a series of what they thought were rules for fire behavior that turns out were just myths about fire behavior.
Setting aside the myths investigators used to convict Gavitt, Syed's team focused on the one piece of hard evidence they had: the gas chromatograph that indicated traces of flammable liquids in the Gavitt home.
It was obviously done by a person who did not appreciate how to operate the instrument and how to interpret it.
When John Lentini retested the samples, he got stunningly different results.
The chemist who had testified at trial that there was gasoline present in the carpet samples had simply misread the test. There is no evidence that any gasoline had been used.
There was no evidence the fire was intentionally set. No one was more surprised than Gavitt himself.
David was just stunned. I think for the longest time, David wasn't able to wrap his head around the fact that no one set this fire, because for all these years he had been told it was unmistakably arson, and he had only been thinking about who could have done it. And now suddenly we were coming in and saying, most likely no one did it. It was an accidental fire.
When David was on trial in 1986, no one ever challenged the idea that the fire was arson or explored how an accidental fire may have occurred.
You see, Angela and I both smoked cigarettes at the time. Angela collected antique oil lamps, and she loved candles. The experts think that it was either a lit cigarette or the candles or the oil lamps that started the fire.
As he had always maintained, David was a victim of the fire, not a perpetrator. The courts agreed.
We all drove up to the prison, told, David's family and friends that he was being released that day.
And on June 6, 2012, after 27 years in prison, Gavitt walked out a free man.
When we were walking out that door, there was a level 1 facility, and they were out on yard time, and they stopped what they were doing. Noticed the attorney stepping out and me stepping out. They stopped playing basketball and horseshoes, whatever they did, and stopped and applauded, clapped their hands.
It's like a scene out of a cheesy movie, but it was actually real.
It's just, it was amazing, truly amazing.
David Gavitt is one of the lucky ones. Exonerations don't come easy.
We have a basic problem here, and that is the culture of science and the culture of justice. Science always looks forward into areas of uncertainty, and the justice system always looks back towards precedents. So there's always been a lag between what science is thinking and what justice thinks they know.
The first step in keeping junk fire science out of the courtroom is educating or re-educating investigators. No easy task.
I have found that in many cases, teaching the new investigators is a lot easier than teaching the old investigators because we're not having to battle years and years of misplaced perspective.
One of my favorite sayings by a scientist is by Max Planck, a great physicist. He said, "Science advances one funeral at a time."
The scope of the issue became evident to Steve Carman in the early 2000s. While leading an advanced arson school at the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, he asked students to examine 2 similarly burned rooms and answer a simple question: where did the fire start? Of the 53 participants, only 3 got the correct answer in the first room, and a different 3 students picked the right spot in the second room.
Well, if you can't figure out where a fire started, you can't figure out how it started, probably.
At the same time, fire scientists are making new discoveries at a stunning rate.
We take for granted the fact that oxygen is everywhere, like it is in our normal lives, because we might have patterns that look like they are indicative of where a fire must have burned the longest, far away from where the fire actually started.
At the Firefighter Safety Research Institute, experiments to better understand the role of oxygen in a fire are taking place on life-sized models.
All right, good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us out here today. Today we're going to be having a bedroom fire here in the center bedroom on the alpha side of the house. As far as our initial setup goes, we're going to have ignition in the corner of the sofa that you guys saw inside the room. The door to the hallway is going to be open to allow more oxygen to make its way into the room and transition that space through flashover. And with that, we'll get in gear and get ready to go and meet back here on the alpha side.
In a control room at a safe distance from the fire, Daniel Madrykowski monitors the temperature in different parts of the rooms, the flow of air, and the oxygen levels near the floor, halfway up the wall, and near the ceiling.
Ignition in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, ignition. We have sustained flames.
Got flames. Nice smoke plume going toward the ceiling. It would appear it's getting a little bit of movement or push from the HVAC system.
We're 1 minute, 30 seconds in.
Flames are to the back of the sofa. The sofa now has foam plastic that seems to be melting and burning. The interior windows are starting to crack. We're starting to see a little bit of smoke.
3 minutes in.
Transition into flashover. The room's flashed over. We still have the windows partially intact.
It is just hot. It is just bright red.
In just 5 minutes, the entire room is engulfed in flames.
No, Nick, go ahead and shut that pump.
Copy.
And so basically the experiment's over. All done.
Madrikowski has set dozens of test fires with slight variations in the amount of ventilation so he can compare the results.
The big question is, do you have enough oxygen to support that transition of flashover?
In this room, there was minimal airflow.
The air was not available to continue combustion in this compartment, and the fire put itself out.
So there was no flashover, just a couch that turned into a love seat. Down the hall, in an identical room, it's a very different story.
We're damaged from the ceiling all the way down to the floor. We've had complete burn through of things that were a half-inch thick plywood, for example, in the space of exposure to post-flashover environment of 5 minutes. We're burnt down to the subfloor. There's very little to nothing left of the sofa.
The aftermath of flashover, this room had plenty of airflow. It turns out, where there's no ventilation, no oxygen fueling the flames, there's no fire. This sheds new light on the Gavitt fire.
David didn't know at the time, you break a window, you create additional ventilation, you cause the fire to grow. Ventilation is the main fuel for a fire like that.
David didn't know that his escape route would fuel the fire because no one knew, not even the top fire scientists of the day. Decades after the publication of NFPA 921, the scientific guideline to investigating fires is still being updated every few years based on new discoveries. Even as science moves forward, there are still people serving life sentences for crimes they didn't commit.
A prisoner at the Michigan Department of Corrections, Carson City West.
Hey. Hey. Hello, Dad.
What y'all got going on?
We've been sitting here waiting for 2 hours for you to call.
Anthony Kiles is one of them, serving life for the murder of a man and 3 children in a house fire. He has claimed his innocence for 24 years. His 3 daughters, Ashley, Shanae, and Amira, were small children when he was incarcerated. Megan Richardson, an attorney from the Michigan Innocence Project, is working on his post-conviction appeal.
We're just talking about the fire and what happened. When did you hear about the fire? Did you know that it happened shortly after?
Yeah, well, me and my wife, we was at our apartment, and I had a cousin. He had called me. He had told me about it. And so me and my wife went over there after everything was over and the fire was out or whatever, and we looked, and I was like...
It happened on September 11th, 1995, at the home of Jacqueline Etchins, Robert Perry, and their 6 children, who were acquaintances of Kyle's. It was a cold night in Pontiac, Michigan, and the family's heat had recently been disconnected. They warmed the children's room with a space heater. 2 hours later, one of the children woke them up. The room was on fire.
Jackie, get up! Get up! Get back! Get back!
Jackie was able to take 3 of the younger children out of the home and go to a neighbor's house to call 911.
Hello, please! Hello! Robert, where are the kids? Where are the rest of the kids? I'm gonna get them. I got them.
Her partner, Robert, went back into the home to try to rescue the 3 other children. And unfortunately, the fire became so intense that Robert and the 3 children did not survive.
Fire investigators spotted what they thought was evidence of arson.
They looked at burn patterns, charred flooring, what was the most destroyed areas of the home. They looked at things like the windows that had gone out. They discussed over and over and over again the intense heat and the high temperatures of the fire.
Hi, ma'am. Can I ask you a few questions?
Etchins told investigators that the space heater started the fire. But her statements were ignored.
The investigation really centered on who could have set this fire as opposed to whether or not the fire was actually a situation where it was an intentionally set fire and whether it qualified it as arson.
Just like the Gavitt case. Pressed by police to think of anyone who might have set the fire, Etchins offered up Anthony Kiles, with whom she'd recently had a disagreement.
I have a question. So, was he like around or anything when it happened?
Was your father around? No, your father was nowhere near. He lived in Pontiac at the time.
Right. But these are kids that he took care of, though.
Yeah, but he wasn't there the night of the fire.
Right.
But investigators were certain they had their man. To seal the deal, they pressured a jailhouse informant named Keith Holliman to claim he saw Kiles throw a Molotov cocktail onto Etchins' porch.
The main witness on the case, Keith Holliman, I decided to write him one day to just get his side of the story. And he did write me back and told me that he pretty much was forced into testifying against my dad.
After 17 years in prison, the Innocence Project reviews Kiles' case and discovers evidence that it was an accidental fire.
There was a dangerously rewired electric space heater that had been hooked up into an outlet in the children's bedroom that we believe was the actual origin of this fire.
The space heater that Etchins told investigators about was most likely the source. Just 2 days before the tragedy, a friend had attempted to repair its broken cord by splicing it with a cord from a lamp.
But when I read the reports where they kept saying, well, the space heater was shiny and new, so I said, well, it couldn't have been a space heater because it was shiny and new. But come to find out, they never really examined the space heater.
And despite NFPA 921, which was published 3 years before the Pontiac fire, the investigators missed the single most consequential finding of new fire science.
The state's experts didn't understand that there are theories like flashover. They assumed because of the intensity of the flames and the high temperatures of the fire, that accelerant had to have been used. Wow. Exactly.
But for the first time, Anthony and his family have a reason to hope.
Just to kind of update you on your case, Anthony, and give you a sense of where we are, is, as you know, we are prepared to file a motion for relief from judgment in your case, but we have decided to first wait and see if the prosecuting attorney's office will work with us and agree to relief in your case.
Yeah, that sounds excellent, and I really appreciate all the things that, you know, the clinic and all the experts have done for me and helping me get on this journey.
I've never thought my father was guilty because I never thought he would do anything like that. He has kids of his own, and I know he wouldn't do anything to hurt anybody's kids.
He always said, I didn't do it, that wasn't me. And I believed him, even though I was a baby when it happened.
And I said, Dad, why didn't you plead guilty? And he said, if I plead guilty, I would have been out by now. I would have had 20 years, I believe. He said, but I didn't do it, so I didn't plead guilty. I said, okay, I understand.
Amira, Shanae, and Ashley grew up without their father and feel betrayed by the system.
They don't care as long as they feel like they've gotten the job done. They don't want to put in the work, the extra work to do what needs to be done to make sure that you're putting the right person behind bars and not taking people away from their families for years.
You have 1 minute remaining.
What'd you say?
Y'all take some pictures?
Oh yeah, we've been snapping it up all day.
Okay then. All right, well, I'm gonna, you know, it's gonna be hanging up here in a few seconds, so I'm gonna call later on tonight then, all right?
Okay, we love you.
All right, take care, Anthony.
Love you too.
Okay.
All right, babe.
All right, bye. Nice to talk to you.
All right, bye.
Bye. Take care.
Thank you for using GTL.
Y'all gonna make me cry. Keep it together, y'all. Come on.
It's hard not to cry when you see them cry.
Once someone is convicted, overturning that conviction is nearly impossible.
There may be new evidence that definitively shows that someone is innocent, yet there's a, years or decades-long battle through the courts where innocence is just a side issue.
Even with exonerating scientific evidence on their side. For Gavitt, it took 27 years. Willingham lost his life. And Kyle's is still waiting. There are estimates that up to 5% of all prisoners in the United States are wrongfully convicted. With over 2 million inmates, that's 100,000 people.
I think the situation's actually worse because that's just talking about people who have been convicted and are serving time in prison. It's not looking at people who were charged with a minor enough crime that they decided to, pay the fine or serve the minimal jail time.
And many innocent people plead guilty to avoid a longer sentence. If Anthony had done so, he would have been released in 2015. For Innocence Clinic attorneys like Richardson and Syed, getting a justice system based on established precedents to embrace new science is a major roadblock.
Our justice system values finality, whereas science is very much about the continuing quest for more and more better understanding of the truth.
Courts may be unwilling to look back and review old convictions, but fire science is a forensic success story moving forward.
Fire investigators, have pretty much accepted that the old way of doing things was not the right way of doing things. And people these days, they follow NFPA 921 because they have to. If you get up in court and say, I don't believe in NFPA 921, the court's going to say, I don't believe in you.
David Gavitt was released in 2012. It took another 7 years of legal battling for him to receive compensation from the state of Michigan. He's also gotten remarried. Finally, he got his happy ending.
All these years of praying and hoping and praying and praying, and that day came for me, and I hope for others that their day will come too, that if they're innocent, somehow, some way, it will be proven innocent.